Road trip, where else? If you're on the East Coast, then where else to go but the great state of Maine, or New England in general? One of my favorite places in the entire country, Portland, Maine. Man, when I arrived, there was a thick fog that clung to everything. And as soon as I arrived, I took a nice walk at night through town and was absolutely taken aback by the charming antiquity surrounding me. From the cobblestone streets, the old street lamps, everything looked just as it did 200 years ago. Nothing's changed. I doubt much has changed in this place, especially in the old Port District, which is just rich with restaurants, bars, and old-style pubs, candle-lit facades. It was unbelievable. A place that literally throws you back in time. It was beautiful, and something to consider. A lot of these places do not take credit card. You need to pay in cash. It was beautiful, though. Again, the place looks just as it did hundreds of years ago, and the food was absolutely delicious. Not expensive as well. If you want good food and not outrageous prices, Portland's the way to go, and that's because most of this food is from its local waters, including the oysters, and man, were they delicious. Just look at them. Glistening, fresh, moist, watery, salty. They give you a list to tell you where the oysters came from, which waters, which bays, and it was delicious. The fish sandwich, as fresh as it gets. The lobster roll, made with an entire stick of butter. It was delicious. And again, the oysters are all labeled with the waters they come from. They were delicious, salty. You tasted the sea salt, the seawater. They were just so tender. After dinner, I hit the streets up for some night photography, and I tell you, the architects at Portland must have had the fog in mind when they created it, when they built these beautiful buildings, because the old school street lamps give off very little light, and they make for some really good contrast between light and shadow, and they look great in the fog. So after photography, I hit up my hotel. Okay guys, I'm here by my motel. It just stopped raining really hard, thundering. It's 3:30 in the morning, cannot sleep. I'm so excited that I just can't sleep. Plus there's so many photos that I need to edit that that's another reason why I just can't sleep. I took so many photographs today. This town is incredible. As a fan of Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft, I grew up reading those novels from both of those authors, and both of those authors are from this area, and I feel like walking through the streets tonight in the fog, I felt like I was transported into all those stories that I read, all those Stephen King stories, H.P. Lovecraft. It's a really pretty town. As for the hotel I'm in, not really the greatest place. I didn't want to stay in a motel. I had an issue with the hotel that I initially reserved. I accidentally reserved it next week. I picked the dates for next week instead of this week, instead of this Sunday through Wednesday. And so when I got to the hotel, they were like, "What? You ain't supposed to be here till next week." I was like, "Oh no." And so I had to make a last minute decision, and so I decided to hang out here and reserve a place in this little hotel. It's not bad, it's cute, but it's a motel. You get what you paid for, you know. Air conditioner goes on and off, on and off. The Wi-Fi sucks. And nothing's worse than the mosquitoes out here. Let me tell you, Maine is just swarming with mosquitoes. Like when I open my door, I have to be quick about it. Like I have to shut the door real fast, because in 1 second, 3 or 4 mosquitoes can just fly right in, and there goes your night's sleep. And so the next day, I got right into my car, didn't even bother eating breakfast, and zipped right into town. It was nice to see the buildings finally without all that fog obscuring my vision. The customs house here was beautiful. Gorgeous architecture everywhere. And even the warehouses and office buildings were pretty. The churches, it was a sight to behold. And seagulls hung around even at night. They were everywhere, pecking at anything. Street art, if you love street art, then Portland's for you. Lots of street art gracing the many cafes, pubs, bars, restaurants. And here, the Old Port District, I found to look quite different in the daytime than it does at night. It's as if Portland, Maine becomes a different city at night. Make that the Old Port District, that is. The pubs and everything just completely transform at night. And for breakfast, I went to the Holy Donut, the famous Holy Donut, donuts made with potatoes. That's right. Mashed potato donuts. They were absolutely delicious. And for lunch, where else but a lobster shack? It was hard to pick one, but I finally settled on the Portland Lobster Company, and man, was it worth it. This here was a clam burger made with capers and vegetables and minced clams. The lobster roll was outstanding. I think they put an entire lobster between that bread. I think I must have had at least 8 lobster rolls during my 3-day stay in South Portland. How could you resist? Surprisingly, traffic in South Portland is very low, and it didn't take long for me to decide on what to do on my second evening, and that's to visit the beautiful lighthouse, Portland Head Light. A photographer's dream, really. I mean, not only is the lighthouse gorgeous, but the beach was absolutely stunning. The lighthouse sits on a beautiful rocky coast, and we had a pretty good sky that day too, and I lucked out. What a sight to behold. I was so smitten by the scene before me, never once did I try to get a unique shot. I just settled for the classic, iconic wide-angle shot of the beautiful coast of Portland Head Light. And so after photographing the lighthouse, I decided to go and take that 12-minute trip back to South Portland for some good old nightlife. And surprisingly, South Portland is an awesome city for nightlife. The bars stay open late, the restaurants are open till midnight or even later in some cases. And the streets were absolutely packed. As usual, I grabbed my camera and tried to photograph the beautiful old rustic facades of these beautiful chowder houses and pubs, which I was quite pleased with the way the photos came out. The next day, I headed to the fish market just to take a look at all the seafood. If you're a seafoodie, man, is there a better capital in the world for seafood than Portland, Maine? The chowder, the salmon chowder here was delicious. The crab cakes here from Gilbert's Chowder House were just beyond anything I've ever had. If you love seafood, if you love this type of food, and not to mention lobster, which they put on everything, even the tacos, then Maine, the entire state of Maine is for you. And that day, on the third day, I decided to take an hour trip down to Nubble Point in the city of York, Maine, which is a beach resort sort of place and known for its absolutely gorgeous Nubble Point Lighthouse, which I kind of find it to be more aesthetically pleasing than Portland Head Light, which is the popular lighthouse and supposedly the most photographed lighthouse in the world. But here, Nubble Point really stood out on that little island. And so at night, I decided to hit up my hotel room a little earlier than I expected to that night. I was a bit tired, lots of hiking, and so I visited my hotel pretty early that night because I was itching to get to my computer and edit the photos I took that day. And I was also itching for a nice glass of wine to go with my lobster tacos, which were delicious, by the way. And so I did my edited photos and did it till about 4 in the morning. The next morning I woke up and was greeted by these interesting little critters on my vehicle. I was gonna go home, but said, you know what, let me break up the trip and take a little pit stop to the notorious city of Salem, Massachusetts. It was always a city that interested me. I was always into, the paranormal and all that, and it really is a town for people who are into horror stories and the paranormal and all that. And occasionally you will stumble across actual buildings tied to the city's notorious past, mostly having to do with the Salem witch trials back in the late 17th century. The Wax Museum was always a place I was dying to visit, no pun intended. But no, it was creepy, but it was interesting. Lots of history, lots of wax figures depicting real historical events. Sad. But the gift shops added some levity to the day. They were filled with some interesting, beautifully adorned with some of the most adorable works of art. I found myself purchasing quite a few of them. The Salem Witch Museum was probably the most interesting place in the entire town of Salem. Inside, they performed a play and recited some of the actual transcripts of the old Salem trials. At the end of the 4-day trip, just under 800 miles, 45 miles a gallon. Not too bad, and I was quite happy with the trip, the photographs. And if you're a photographer, a landscape photographer, a nature photographer, then Maine is your playground. Thanks for tuning in, guys.